Good morning, poetry lovers, and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on Indian poetry in English. You might remember well that in the previous lecture we had started haiku poetry in English, and that also in Indian poetry in English. And in that lecture we had discussed the haikus of T. Vasudeva Reddy. We have another significant major voice who has written haikus and tankas in abundance, and the name of such a poet is Professor R.K. Singh. So, we shall have a detailed discussion on the poetry of R.K. Singh, but before that let me just try to bring a recap. And as we discussed the other day about the tradition of haiku in Indian English literature, and you all remember that it originated in Japan, fine, it originated in Japan and it was adopted by many English as well as other Indian regional languages also. It is quite noteworthy to mention here that one of the veteran poets and novelists, Ageya, whom we know by the name Sachidanand Hiranand Batshayan, he also practiced his hands at writing some of the haikus. Haiku, as we have discussed, is a poem which is made up of 17 syllables divided into 5, 7 and 5 segments. Most of the haikus are 3-liners. And in the previous lecture also we had talked about Tagore being or considered the first haiku poet in English. In 1948, the Marathi literary journal Richa brought out a special number of haiku with a long article by Sirish Pai, a renowned Marathi poet. Even Amrita Pritam also translated some haiku poems in the literary journal Nagmani. Some Sindhi poets have also developed this form, and they modified the old Indian tradition of Doha, and they took 11, 13 and 11 matra part of Doha and called Sindhu haiku. We can also find some of the haikus which have been translated, such as a naughty people laughing mischievously inside the well. It is quite significant to mention here that haikus are small poems, usually a 3-liner, but then you can find it is full of images, it is full of metaphors, and in order to find out the meaning one has to be very serious in order to extract the meaning of a haiku poem. Haiku has been adopted in other languages such as Bengali, Assamese, Gujarati, Sindhi, Kannada and Hindi. And as I had mentioned in the previous lecture, and I am going to repeat, we have some haiku poets, namely T. Vasudeva Reddy, R.K. Singh, N.V.Subbaraman, Urmila Kaul, Mahasweta Chaturvedi and others. So, we have already discussed T. Vasudeva Reddy, and in his haiku poems we have found out the realism, the irony, the contemporary picture, and here again in the world of R.K. Singh, who is actually one of the living legends of haiku poetry in Indian writing in English. But who is this R.K. Singh? Let us have a peep into his life. R.K. Singh was born on 31st December 1950 in Varanasi, India. Professor Singh, who retired as a professor from Indian School of Mines, now IIT ISM Dhanbad, but he began his career with the Press Trust of India, but of late, I mean once he came into his teaching world, though he had been composing poems since his school days as well, he has authored more than 160 articles, 175 book reviews, and he has also authored 46 books, 20 collections of poems that are actually to his credit. Professor Singh has worked as an ELT practitioner whose contribution in the field of Indian writing in English as well as in ELT is quite great. He has written quite a good number of volumes on haiku poetry, and he is one such haikuist whose works have been translated into majority of languages of the world, namely in Chinese, in Japanese, French, Spanish, then Serbian, German, Italian, and many more. Many of his works which are available online also, and there have been many e-books also in the translated forms. It is quite good to get ourselves acquainted with Professor R.K. Singh, and since Professor Singh has written more than 20 books, I mean, we can have a look at his poetry collections. Namely, he started with My Silence in 1985, then Memories Unmemoried, then Music Must Sound, Flight of Phoenix, I Do Not Question, My Silence and Other Selected Poems, which is actually a collection of his poetry for 20 years, 1974 to 1994, and then Every Stone Drop Pebble, which was actually a joint venture with Catherine Meyer and Patricia Prime, came up in 1999, then Cover to Cover in 2002, Peddling Dreams. It is also a collection of 3 languages, haiku, then English and Italian, and then one of his books which actually made him at times very critical, and he had to face several brickbats from many of the contemporary poets and critics. So, the book entitled Sexless Solitude and Other Poems, then came Sense and Silence, Collected Poems, New and Selected Poems, Tanka and Haiku, I am no Jesus and other selected poems, You Cannot Send Me and other selected poems, There is No Paradise and other selected poems. Even of late he has published in 2019 Tented with Prayers, Silencio Blanca, Desconfianza, Silence Why Distrust, that was again a Spanish edition, then A Lone Sparrow, then in 2021 came Against the Waves, and since 2021 happened to be a year of the COVID, so one of his collections came COVID-19 and Surge of Silence, fine, it was published from Romania, fine, and then came Changing Seasons, which is actually the last, but then Professor Singh is still not top, he is still playing and he is still writing, so he is not an extinguished volcano, fine. Professor Singh is still writing his haikus. So, before we come to understand the nitty-gritty of his poetic world and the meaning that Singh tries to convey through his poetic lines, let us take some of the lines, because Professor Singh had to face so many charges by many of his friends who consider him only a poet who is confined simply to the delineation of women, body, sex and many things. So, in one of the poems Professor Singh writes, this is from Sexless Solitude and Other Poems, where he writes, I am no Jesus, but I can feel the pains of crucifixion, as a common man, suffer all what he suffered, play the same reference. So, Professor Singh is never defensive, rather what he believes is that he is a person who actually delineates or depicts the truth of contemporary reality, even when he is dealing with the flesh, he is dealing with the spirit, he is dealing with the contemporary picture of poverty, of pollution, of politics and what more. Professor Singh can be considered to have a sharp and sharp tone, and especially at times satirical also. We can take some of the lines from one poem entitled I Do Not Question. I mean, it is a collection where he says, and that can also be taken as a defense mechanism by Professor Singh, where he writes, I seek new strides in each of your moves, new dreams in your eyes and thighs. So, Professor Singh also creates a sort of musicality, even though there may not be rhymes, because haikus may not rhyme at times. but Professor Singh creates a sort of internal melody, internal music, and that is why there is no wonder to come across thighs, legs, fine. I mean, all the parts of human body being delineated and represented by Professor Singh in majority of the poems. And what he says is actually an eye-opener. He says that human body has always been sacrosanct, and in defense of writing his poems, majority of them are directed or addressed to women. What he says is, woman itself is poetry. Fine. So, Professor Singh, when he talks about a woman, he talks about women in all sorts of manifestations. Actually, he believes that it is woman who is a creative force. In fact, what he wants to say is, there are certain things which many of us actually feel, but then we are not able to express. That is why he uses a term like sexpression. Sexpression, fine. It is not only expression but sexpression, and you can come across. And it is Professor Singh who, to his credit, also practiced his hand at Tanka poems. Now, you might be curious to know what is the difference between a haiku poem and a Tanka poem. My dear friends, haiku is a short liner, and when we come to haiku is a poem of 3 lines, whereas Tanka is a poem of 5 lines. We can also find that Tanka was developed much earlier. I think it has got a history of 1300 years, fine, whereas haiku has a history of 300 years. So, when we talk about haiku and talk about Tanka, many people often find a sort of resemblance. But what is quite significant in this regard is, when we talk about Tanka, Tanka can be considered to be classical Tanka, then traditional Tanka, then we can also talk about Tanka which has got a sort of autobiographical tone. Actually, Tanka was written in the form of a love note. It is always said that the composition of Tanka is after somebody has spent a very pleasant night with his beloved, and the next time he actually drafts it in the form of a love note. So, Tanka is a love note, fine, between 2 lovers. It has got 31 syllables, whereas haiku has got 17 syllables, and these 31 syllables are divided as 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. Actually, when we talk about the themes of Professor Singh's poetry, usually the theme is nature, the theme is women, sexuality, and in this regard Professor Singh believes that both nature and women have got the creative impulse, the creative power, and we cannot deny them their rights. It is actually because of them that the world has become so beautiful, and that is why, in a way, even though he is talking about the body parts of the women and the sexuality of the woman, but then Professor Singh actually celebrates life, because he celebrates the struggle between the flesh and the spirit. He actually also talks about the culture and tradition. In his defensive way, he may be considered to have representing our ancient, ancient gospel and ancient truths that we find in the works of Vidyapati and we find in the works of Batsyayan and all. But then, if one looks at Professor Singh's poetic oeuvre with a new sensibility, he will find out how there is a modern sensibility, and then he is not devoid of the depiction of myth, ritual and religion in his poetry. Of course, at times Professor Singh's becomes very, he represents the stark reality of the society that we are living in. So, that way he is a poet who is courageous as a thinker, and he does not hesitate, he does not have any inhibition of hiding. We often say that when we talk about poetry, we say that poetry is actually a sort of concealment. But if you come across Professor Singh's poetry, we find that Singh's poetry is a sort of revelation. This revelation, the secret of which lies and lurks at the heart of everyone, but then nobody dares expressing it. what Professor Singh says in one of his interviews, and what he admits is, he says, I write because I want to feel lighter. So, writing is a form of relief. Writing is a form of relieving, liberated or refreshed within. I write to seek a release from myself as much as from others, to feel free by unburdening myself in verses, to experience an inner balance, feeling, probing, sensing, recalling, or whatever. When he talks about woman in one poem after another, we can here take a note of it when he says in one of the poems entitled Above the Earth's Green, where he says, woman is the measure of all things, body, truth, love, spirit, God, society, and peace. And the poem continues. Now, one of the major, poetic collection which is full of Tankas, because we have been talking about Professor Singh's Tanka also. Haiku we have already talked about in Basudev Reddy's world, but then let us here we shall focus more on the Tankas, and then we will also take up some of the haikus by Professor Singh. So, this The River Returns, it is actually a collection of 372 Tankas. It is very difficult to take up all of them, but then we shall take up some of them in order to understand the essence of what Professor Singh talks about. Let us take Tanka number 10, where he says, and in all these Tankas you will find Professor Singh is talking about the various forms of love, the separation, the union, the manifestation, the blending, fine. So, at times, because love has to face all sorts of situation, sometimes storm, sometimes ice, sometimes cold, sometimes hot, sometimes union, sometimes separation. So, let us take Tanka number 10, where the poet says, at the river she folds her arms and legs, resting her head upon the knees, and sits as an island. Now, look at this Tanka. This is actually where the poet tries to picturize or delineate the sort of separation, and when in separation, what actually are the two lovers, one of them being woman, how she, and then here again you can find she folds her arms and legs, resting her head upon the knees, and sits as an island. So, as an island, there is actually a note of loneliness, the beloved being discarded, being abandoned, and then what he says is in another Tanka, in Tanka number 20, when I wanted to change seats, my friend said, she can only if the door is locked, the light out, and her moon in another city. Now, here also see also the poet talks about how how during the union they actually want that everything to be a sort of affair where no other person can have a glance, and only if the door is locked. So, here we talk about the tradition as well. My hand held out in the dark remained empty, no one reached it to give joy of the meeting hands. Again, how when the lovers are separated, and then each one trying to meet each other, each one trying to reach each other, but then the poet says, my hand held out in the dark remained empty, no one reached it to give joy of meeting hands. And then in love also one can find fear, frustration, anxiety, and this is also being depicted by Professor Singh as ghosts rise to mate in moonlight, tear the tombs, frightened with fingers, rhino horns rock the center, granite sensation. Fine. Roses await the sun and wind to clear the baleful fog. I fear she shall say no to my love again. When the agitated The longing lover tries or wants or longs for a sort of union, but then there is a continuous fear involved, and that is being represented as the baleful fog. The baleful fog. Look at the use of the words. I fear she will say no to my love again. And then the 111, fine. Here once again there is a note we can find. 1,000 miles traveling together, in tense silence he and she contemplate the next round of duel. The next round of duel. Now, my dear friend, even in love there can be not only a sort of despair, but then as we progress and as we mature, perhaps the longing for the love takes a different dimension. And the poet has rightly said, 1,000 miles traveling together, find the journey of love. In tense silence now, he and she contemplate, he and she think the next round of duel. There may be a sort of quarrel, there may be a sort of a duel between each other, fine. And that is how this entire collection titled The River Returns, fine. So, the river also is here symbolical, and the return also, the return may be triumphant, the return may be sadistic, the return may be full of frustrations, but the nature and the women's nature, they actually some way or the other bear a sort of similarity, fine. So, we proceed further. So, we can also continue taking some more tankas, and as I have mentioned earlier, these tankas are actually the love notes. And here we can find, since it is a 5-liner and it has got 31 syllables, but Singh is an experimentalist. He will keep on experimenting. Sometimes he will bring a sort of musicality in terms of in terms of the word play, where you can find lots of assonances and consonances working together in order to give others the impression of the same note of unification or the same note of separation. Let us take the first one, where he says, butterfly cushions flutter the skirt, flame flickers ground to whiteness for her fist. Now see how the poet actually plays on a particular sound. Butterfly, flutter, flame, flickers, ground to whiteness for her fist. So, the poet is actually a great observer, and he observes here one woman's skirt, and where he says how the picture that is delineated, and he makes a word play, but then he provides a sort of sensuousness at times also. Again, in the park, seeing the green in her eyes, seeing the green in her eyes, joy wells up. She feels the silver blue, the leaves breathing her touch. Looking for image of divine on the wall, to pray or chant a mantra or hymn in mind, she leans on him to kiss. So, in majority of these tankas, you will come across some sort of sensuousness, some sort of romantic longings or whatsoever, but at times the poet also becomes very conscious, and he also looks at the world, and then he becomes so conscious that even when he is, when the poet is actually trying to provide us a sort of melodious love song, but then he is conscious and he wants his persona to be conscious as well, and he says, in the air I expected romance, Corona, avoid her kiss and breathing too. So, the poet, in a way, because the poet here is very suggestive and he is conscious of Corona being in the air, and that is why in a very suggestive manner he indicates, in the air I expected romance, but Corona, avoid her kiss. And then again, in one tanka or another, what he says, how he comes across the depiction of love, light switched off for love sliding on window pane, moon 2 sighs away behind the bare tree, intruding the darkness of bedroom, a tree's silhouette, she whispers its masked presence and says no to love making. The poet actually in a way at times appears to be impressionistic at times also, and he finds, because his observation is very strong, the poet is very fertile in terms of his observation, and then in one tanka after another you can find, and then again he is also telling you something. There is, one can also come across a sort of autobiographical note in several of the tankas, and then here, as with the progression of the age and with the advancement of the society, how love has also had certain restrictions, love has also had certain impediments, and the poet says, the power goes off, suddenly summer heat chokes. In bed sleepless she turns, undoing a hook or two of her tight blouse. And then, it is not aging but eternal delight, you under me, smooth belly, nude necking, slow stroking, parting flesh. So, the poet talks of love in all ages. Every man has got several ages, youth, adult, then old age, and then he says, but love continues, maybe its form is different. So, as humans, fine, what actually Professor Singh tries to tell us is that love is a continuous force and women got a sort of creative impulse. So, calling him simply a poet who is obsessed with women and obsessed with sexuality will perhaps be a very early statement. As he says, in the night, in the white of night, in the white of night, sighs for supreme delight. See, the poet also rhymes at times. Steal tender pleasure, manipulating wetness in bed, unmask simple sin. So, we can also, but then the poet is not confined only to love. The poet also talks about peace. The poet also talks about greater things. I thought I would locate you in the dark lonely street. Now, we have come to some haikus. I thought I would locate you in the dark lonely street, but I myself got lost. So, what a sort of contrariness, what a sort of irony. I am trying to locate, I am trying to find my beloved, but then in that I am myself lost. Mind's mazy prompts socked me into nakedness I never perceived. The misleading sun, the unreal reflections, the dumb so dazzle my eyes. Fine, the dumb so dazzle my eyes. Shades of terror in alleys, a smell of treachery. At the crossroads, the selfish genes tarots of my random choices. I chuckle to myself, hearing raps of inverse world and peace in sin. Even there is peace in sin. Even when you long for something and you long for some such things which may invite troubles, but still you can find a sort of peace. Actually, love has got this sort of quality, The more you are in love, the more you are in longing, and with all sorts of, because when you are going to accept somebody as one of your mates or somebody as one of your friends or somebody as one of your darlings, even then, as the poet says, finally you return to the same, because love has got such a captivating touch, it has got such a force that you cannot. But remember, as I have been saying, the poet is not confined only to the love making and sexuality. The poet is also a sort of existential thinker. The poet is a philosopher who is also worried about the contemporary problems of the world, who also can talk about the politics, who also can talk about the war. And in one of the poems entitled At War, look at the picture that the poet actually tries to create here. In the ruins, now it is a war has been lost or a war has been won, but think of those who have lost something or the other, and in the ruins, searching her photo, evening standing behind the window bars, observes darkness in shapes, awaits his son's phone call from the border. Dogs and cats wail, a dead voice calling up and down, drowsy eyes, alone, on her bed rings the cell phone. So now how a mother, how a parent who actually is worried about the son who is at the war front and how the anxiety level suddenly shoots up, and then every call that is going to come may be a call that might be very frightening, and that may bring some ill news, bring some ominous news, and that the parents are waiting for. And then alone, see, the poet actually uses the words and unfolds a lot of meaning. Alone on her bed rings the cell phone, and the moment the cell phone rings, I mean, maybe something very disastrous, something very shattering sort of news will come. And you know, so the poet is not only dipped, as many poets have said, that the poet is dipped in sexuality and all, but the poet also talks about the contemporary problems of the world. Now, what actually are the characteristic features or hallmarks? Because Singh is being known nowadays as a writer of haiku and as a writer of tanka poems, and naturally when we talk about tanka poems, we talk about love notes and all. But then are there other things also? Yes, of course. Singh actually experiments with the style and the theme. Singh is not a traditionalist haiku and tanka writer. Singh actually tries to, because you know he is an ELT practitioner, he knows how to play with the words, he knows how he can create a sort of pun, he knows how he can create a sort of assonance and consonance, and how he can create internal rhyming and musicality through his poetry. Actually, Professor Singh prefers speech rhythms over rhymes, meaning thereby thought is more important. There is a use of enjambment, because one line flows to the another in order to get or provide it the meaning. There are at times juxtapositions you can find, but at the core of it there is actually a philosophy of life, because Singh has already said, I am not Jesus, isn't it? I am not Jesus. And you know, all of us need to understand this crude fact, that all of us are waiting simply for one thing, and that is death. And one can find the delineation of death in some of the poems of Professor Singh as well. Singh draws images from nature and surrounding. It is quite noteworthy to make a mention of one quote about Singh, where it is said, most of the images in Singh's long poems are conventional. When he writes a long poem, the images are conventional. Maybe they are from myth, ritual, religion, nature, literature and urban settings, with a small infusion of images and symbols which are synthetical or compounds of the conventional and the fabricated. Now, as I have been saying, that Singh believes that this human life is very temporary, very short. Naturally, one should always be prepared for death, because who knows whether once you die people will remember you or not. So what he intends to say is, as he says, I don't fear death, but I know what life has been and could be without fortuity. No, he believes in a fate also, but he says, I do not fear death. He delineates the theme of death in many of his poems, and that way we can also consider Professor Singh to be an existentialist like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre and Aurobindo. Death in majority of the poems of Professor Singh is a sort of metaphor, and metaphor for what? Metaphor for meaninglessness, uselessness, nothingness, negation, falsehood, corruption, manipulation. Fine? Of course, there are the themes of sexuality dominating in majority of the poems, but then, as I have been saying, that Singh is a very candid, a very frank poet. He doesn't have any hesitation, and what he says is that human body is sacred. Human body is very sacred. He has anti-dogmatic view of sex, and that is why you can find the use of legs, thighs, eyes, breasts, fine. So everything in his poems. For him, body is not a taboo, body is actually a purifying force. So that way Singh becomes a realist, and he says, culture is not repression, but sublimation through expression. So it is a sublimation through expression. And then as the poem follows, he says, why do they police art for lesbianism? And you see how the poet also has got a sort of foresight. Today you see there are many such taboo things which have actually been, which have got a sort of approval. So as a poet, he is a thinker and he always looks into the seeds of time, and he says, why do they police art for lesbianism, homosexuality, naked sex or blasphemy? So this is from Portraits We Fear to See. In this regard, it is quite pertinent to make a mention of the quote, one of the contemporary poets and editors of several volumes, P.C.K. Prem, says, the poet discovers meaning in passion and in sex. In passion, and sex is interpreted as a liberating and purifying factor in Singh's poetic scheme. To that extent, the poet exhibits anxiety for tradition and heritage. Now, having discussed the over of Professor Singh as a poet, we find that Singh is very close to our ancient poets and our ancient theorists who have actually delineated body as a force that can liberate. So long as the body becomes a prison house, perhaps the door to the spiritual home is always locked. And that is why Singh may be considered to be a sort of experimental poet of modern times. No doubt one can find plethora of depiction of women loneliness, alienation, existential search, but then carnality and spirituality, though they go hand in hand in majority of the poems. So to say that Singh is a poet of modern sensibility perhaps will not be an exaggeration. We can take some of the lines from his latest collection named Against the Waves. And the poet is also against the waves, because the poet is against the traditional ways of thought process. And in one of and you know, as I have been saying, that Singh is, as a poet, is a thinker as well. So he looks at what the contemporary society has to offer us, and then in one of the poems entitled Post Election, what he says, they don't hear the silent scream of millions. See the reality. So the poet cannot be considered simply to be following blindly the adoration of women in all forms. The poet also derides the politicians and says they do not hear the silent screams of millions, tired of misfortune, play games of convenience, innocent voters. See the beauty. Innocent voters, sordid life, nation's destiny, heaven fed. So Singh as a poet is a philosopher, is a thinker, and he is also worried about the contemporary scenario. In one of the poems he says that perhaps those who are actually playing on sounds, playing on songs to, you know, to an utmost way, or without bothering much, perhaps they do not know how their songs or how these vociferous voices will affect the sick, the old, the little child and all. So Singh is a thinker in that respect. He also has a poem entitled COVID-19, where he says, punitive corona virus leprous, some say it is invasion, the barbarian without. Quarantined, I clear my throat behind the face mask. Breathe in unknown viruses, suffer new repressions. Now lockdown, cut off life, castration, Hugo said, monasticism, resisting death. Fine. So even the contemporary situation of COVID gets mentioned in his poetry, and then he says how even though we have masked ourselves, we have quarantined ourselves, yet we are breathing in many unknown viruses. Then there are some poems entitled New Gods, where he says meditation, future uncertainties beyond crisis, new strains, new virus. Every now and then we are hearing that the new mutant has come, the new virus has come, villains of the new order peeking from windows, create new mantras for life to continue, envision new gods. Perhaps gods have also been very helpless and gods are also not helpful. Earlier so Singh actually tries to, Singh can be considered to be a sort of iconoclast in this regard, and then there is always, there is always a sort of indication or prediction, or there is something on anvil that people say the third wave may come. So the poet writes, I don't recognize bright new star in the sky. The pensive poet has become, frustrated now and says, beacon of hope, they say a new age begins on earth, the virus mutates. So here is a new age. Scaring millions, post-Christmas repeat events, no vaccination could change astro calendar of universal revenge. So on the one hand, we are getting vaccinated, but do we really think that can post-Christmas repeat events, no vaccination? Remains of prayer now wrapped in gift box, held up, seeping delays, no burial, no third day, total lockdown here and there. So how our everyday activities have come to a halt. No, you might quite be aware of the fact that many people who had to suffer on account of this virus or this disease, they could not get the proper funeral at least. So, and that is why the poet rightly says, remains of prayer now wrapped in gift box, held up, seeping delays, no burial, no third day, total lockdown here and there. Now, my dear friends, actually Singh had to face many questions, many interrogations, and why he writes haikus and tankas, why he expresses in this form. So what he said in one of the interviews, in fact, when I was in search of a form for my poems, I discovered haiku and tanka nearer my aesthetics, because he wanted to say more things in less words. I had already found brevity, and haiku had provided texture to many of my regular free verse poems. Haiku and tanka suit me because my poetic mood is short-lived, and I prefer to write short personal lyrics, now using short long, short three-liners, or short long, long five-liners with native contents and experience. Of course, while one does such, one may become repetitive, and the poet also admits one tends to be repetitive, enslaved to the form in their attempt to produce an excellent verse. In fact, compressed verse writing with limited focus may affect their regular poetry practices, while genuine haiku writing may be spiritually elevating. So this gives him a sort of a spiritual elevation, but slowly one may also end up in silence with a long meditative or dried up imagination. So the poet becomes a realist here. So we can take some lines from Tented with Prayers. Look at the title, Tented with Prayers. The poem is titled Depression, where he says, November morning, too many thorns to reach, the only rose and the tormenting thought. Fine. Too many thorns to reach, too many impediments. The only rose. What is this rose? This rose may be hope. This rose may be a new progression, that I am forsaken. If I die today, it won't matter to any. I have no worth. They all care for themselves. Search nearest in curved space. The poet also becomes depressed, and he says that if I die today, perhaps nobody will be affected. They all care for themselves. Everyone, in this age is thinking of themselves. I am actually reminded of T. Basudev Reddy, who says, nobody is no one to no one. Fine. To whom? Fine. I mean, ultimately we all are alone, and the poet also here makes such a realization. And then it continues, last night rain paves way for a clear sky. This morning the breeze is cool and the sun adds a new hue to the spring. Source of salvation. The poet progresses now and thinks of a sort of spirituality and says, source of salvation, depository of sins, no cake cutting, in church promise of reaping, if I could sow recovery seed. Can there be, the poet actually longs for, can there be, because all along the life we have done all sorts of crimes, we have committed all sorts of evil deeds. Can there be a recovery seed? a dark street, chaos on the road, fear delays, homeward move at 9, lumpens lie in wait. So the poet wants to go homeward, meaning thereby there is a return, but in return is there also reconciliation? And then the poet says, peeping through the fog, the sun feebly comforts. Even the sun doesn't have that much of power now. The sun feebly comforts a sparrow's nest built under the window sill. I hear a newborn crying. Fine. Think of those people who have got no proper shelter like a sparrow's nest, but then when the sun also has got a very feeble ray and a very feeble comfort, choking air in a walled colony, two tired pigeons perk on overhead tank, whisper pity on us. So like there can be a sort of autobiographical tone, because the poet also might be thinking that there are only two people left, and the children, like the children of all the birds, they have gone and settled in their homes. So perhaps the poet also feels, and there is a sort of parallelism also here. Fine, there is a sort of commiseration, there is a sort of sympathy when the poet looks at the pigeon and says, the two tired pigeons, tired of life, tired of all these struggles, they perk on the overhead tank, whisper pity on us. So we are now old, helpless, aged people. This is actually the picture, this is a universal picture. And then the poet once again says, when change comes, things change. They say sight beyond sight. In the wealthy vacuum, all is well with limping days. All is well with limping days. Why? Because the earthy body and nightness of silence, fear in mirror, return to the river, echoing hollowed sound. And then the last one that we can take, life is beautiful when you enter another body, mind, and become one in each other. Again the poet sings of love and says, life can be beautiful only in union, in each other with foreign sound. I could not be the lasting poem. Provisional body, of course our body is provisional, my dear friend. Nude smell and white distrust, play freedom in mounds of cloud. Everywhere there is anxiety, everywhere there is fear, everywhere there is a fear of the unknown, everywhere there is a fear of death, everywhere there is a fear of the time passing by. So the poet also is a realist, and that is why whatever the poet has written in one poem after another, he actually tries to sing, he actually tries to celebrate the ethos of this life which we have got to live on this earth. We can very quickly take some critical comments, and in this regard one of the comments which is very eye-opening is, Singh's is not so much a poetry of memory, it is not a poetry of memory as many people say, but it is inevitably sparked by what he sees, hears and feels, because Singh is the great observationist. Fine. Singh is a person who experiments, no doubt, but then Singh celebrates. It is his way of being faithful to the constantly evolving experience of life in a physical body. Singh is concerned about man's existence and identity, and that is why there is every now and then there is actually a sort of struggle, and struggle towards the higher aims of life, struggle towards the higher aims not only of life but also a sort of realization that this human life is short living. So before we come to end of this talk, let me take a few lines and these lines may summarize what actually Singh wants to convey through his poetic world. Half-fleshed faces, look at the lines, half-fleshed faces track from behind the window, roundness of journey. I mean, this is actually a longing for life. Whatever life we live, we never have a sort of satisfaction, and we always feel rawness of journey, the journey is still incomplete. We have, even towards the end of life, many longings which we think, what if this could have happened, what if this could not have happened. little candles fail to illumine the deity. Now even the God has become very helpless, and you think that simply by lighting some candles, you perhaps will be lightening it and God will perhaps see you in the light. No, little candles fail now to illumine the deity or golden dome. In the valley darkness reigns and God too awaits light. God is also looking for light. God is also looking for more happiness. God is also looking for more submission. God is also looking for more admission, the admission of man before the Almighty. Lying listless on withered creeper, a golden bird. And you know how our own soul, lying listless on a withered creeper, on a golden bird. No, we have all sorts of images. We have all sorts of images. And these images, which are in the form of art, sometimes or the other, we go to see those art pieces. Sometimes or the other, we go to see what are inscribed on the walls in the divine temples. But when we talk about the same in our day-to-day affairs, this becomes a taboo. And Singh actually wants to disapprove of all the charges and say, human life is meant to be lived, human life is meant to be loved, and human life is meant to be celebrated. I think I have been able to familiarize you with the great and the vast poetic oeuvre of Professor R.K. Singh, who is perhaps a living legend whose works have been translated into majority of languages of the world. With this, let me come to the end of this talk. Thank you very much. I wish you all a very good life. I wish you all a very good love. I wish you all a very good longing again for poetry, longing again for music, longing again for celebration. With this, thank you very much. I wish you all a good night.